There are objects in this world that shimmer not because of light, but because of legend. Artifacts so ancient, so deeply woven into the roots of human and magical history that even time itself seems to bend around them. Among these relics stands one of the greatest enigmas ever crafted, the Cloak of Invisibility. For centuries, Hogwarts whispered its name like a prayer and a warning. Students told stories in the dormitories of a cloak that could make one vanish completely, of wanderers who walked unseen through history, and of a death itself once tricked by a clever man. But what few realize is that the story of that cloak is far older, far darker, and far more human than anyone dares to imagine. Long before it ever draped over the shoulders of a young boy named Harry Potter, before it hid him from monsters and masters alike, the cloak belonged to a family whose fate was forever tied to the shadow of death itself. It began, as many great stories do, with three brothers, Antioch, Cadmus, and Ignotus Peverell. Wizards of immense talent, yes, but more than that, dreamers. They sought not just to master magic, but to conquer its limits. And in one fateful encounter, standing at the edge of a dark river where many had drowned before them, they met the one thing no wand could control: death. But the story you've heard, the one told by Beedle the Bard, is a softened echo of truth. The real meeting was no simple parable. It was a bargain written in the blood of arrogance and the ink of fear. Each brother did not merely ask for a gift. They demanded it. They believed themselves equals to the entity before them, and death, ancient and patient, granted their desires with a smile as thin as smoke. Antioch's wand, the Elder Wand, was forged from a bone older than any tree. Cadmus's stone was a fragment of death's own heart. But Ignotus, the youngest and perhaps the wisest, asked for something different. He wanted no weapon, no power, no resurrection. He wanted freedom, to live untouched by death's shadow until his time truly came. And so death gave him the cloak. It was not cloth. It was not woven from silk or thread or moonlight, as some tales suggest. It was the night itself, folded and bound to human will, a living fragment of the boundary between life and death. When Ignotus first placed it over his shoulders, the world fell silent. No heartbeat, no breath, no sound. He did not vanish from sight. He vanished from existence. He walked among the living and the dead unseen, the only man who could slip between both realms without consequence. The cloak became his sanctuary, his burden, and his salvation. While his brothers succumbed to their desires, Antioch slain by envy, Cadmus by grief, Ignotus lived a life of quiet wisdom. He loved, raised a family, and when his time came, he did something remarkable. He removed the cloak, placed it in his son's hands, and greeted death as an old friend. But this is where the fairy tale ends, and the truth begins. For the cloak did not remain a family heirloom. Generations of Peverells guarded it, yes, but each bearer found that it was not simply a tool to hide from the world. It watched, it remembered, it grew heavier with every life it saved and every death it avoided, because like all powerful magic, it demanded balance, and the more it was used to cheat fate, the more reality bent to correct itself. When the last direct descendant of Ignotus died, the cloak did something no enchanted object had done before. It chose. It vanished from history, not stolen, not lost, simply gone. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell. Hogwarts itself was founded, and still, the cloak remained hidden, waiting for the one it deemed worthy. Some say it rested deep beneath the castle grounds, in chambers older than the school itself. Others whisper that the founders knew of it, that Rowena Ravenclaw once spoke of a veil of shadow that no spell could pierce, and that Salazar Slytherin sought to claim it. believing it could hide him from the judgment of time. None succeeded, for the cloak was not meant for greed, nor for glory. It was meant for understanding, for those who could walk through darkness without being consumed by it. Centuries later, on a cold night in Godric's Hollow, that legacy would awaken again, and the world once more would learn that no one, not even death, forgets a promise. History often hides its greatest truths in silence, not by accident, but by design. And so the story of the Cloak of Invisibility slipped from legend into myth, whispered only by those who knew what it meant to carry a secret too powerful for the world to bear. After Ignotus Peverell's death, his descendants lived under the quiet protection of the cloak. They were not kings or conquerors, not even the kind of wizards who sought glory in battle. They were watchers, guardians of balance who understood that power meant nothing if it could not be controlled. But the world, as always, does not reward restraint. As the centuries turned, the bloodline of Ignotus thinned, and the magic of the cloak began to stir restlessly, as if it were searching for purpose once more. In the shadowed archives of the Ministry of Magic, buried beneath centuries of forgotten scrolls, lies a record almost no one has read: the disappearance of the Peverell line. It tells of a family who seemed to vanish from history overnight, homes abandoned, names erased, graves unmarked. Some believed it was the result of a curse, others of fear, that they had simply hidden too well and never returned. But the truth is stranger. The cloak itself had withdrawn, refusing its bearers. For generations, no trace of it appeared, until Hogwarts. In the 11th century, when the castle was still being raised stone by enchanted stone, a faint presence began to haunt the builders, shadows that moved where none should, footsteps in empty corridors, whispers carried on the wind. Helga Hufflepuff, ever the kind-hearted one, thought it was the castle itself, alive, learning to breathe. Rowena Ravenclaw suspected something older, something intelligent, and Salazar Slytherin, he feared it. He claimed that a relic of death walked their halls, a presence that neither magic nor spell could dispel. One night, the founders gathered in the newly completed Great Hall. The torches burned blue that evening, flickering like the breath of ghosts. Ravenclaw had discovered something, a small piece of black silk, impossibly soft, impossibly cold, that appeared in the library out of nowhere. It shimmered not with color, but with absence. Godric Gryffindor reached for it first, brave but reckless as ever, only to find his hand pass straight through it as though it rejected his touch. That night, the cloak was seen again for the first time in centuries, not as a garment but as a living veil gliding through the castle's corridors like a memory that refused to fade. No one could command it, no one could possess it. Even the most powerful enchantments failed to contain it. And then one morning, it was simply gone, as if it had melted back into the stone itself. But Hogwarts remembered. And in the centuries that followed, strange tales persisted of unseen students wandering at night, of objects moving without cause, of a protective presence that shielded children from accidents that should have been fatal. The professors called them coincidences. The ghosts whispered otherwise. Because Hogwarts is not merely a school, it is a living repository of the world's deepest magic. And the cloak, tied to both life and death, could not help but be drawn to it. Centuries later, when the last heir of Ignotus, a humble wizard named Henry Potter, inherited the cloak, he never understood its true nature. He saw it as a family heirloom, an oddity, something to keep hidden away. He passed it to his son, who passed it again, until it reached a man named James Potter, bright, reckless, full of laughter, and entirely unprepared for the destiny he carried. And yet, the cloak recognized him instantly. It clung to him like an old friend. For the first time in centuries, it had found a heart pure enough to wear it. Not for power, not for fear, but for joy. James used it not to escape death, but to live, sneaking through Hogwarts halls with his friends, breaking curfew, laughing in the face of the darkness around him. He didn't know it, but the cloak was watching. It had hidden many before him, but never had it chosen someone who wore it with such innocence. And when the storm of Voldemort began to rise, the cloak began to change. Its fabric grew colder, its hum deeper, it knew. It remembered Death's promise that when the shadow rose again, it would be called upon. Not to hide a man, but to protect a legacy. The night James Potter died, the cloak was not there. He had left it folded on a chair, unaware that by doing so, he had set into motion the next great turning of destiny. For even in its absence, it was waiting for the child who would fulfill the promise that began beside that ancient river so long ago. There are nights in history when time itself seems to hold its breath, when destiny, like a thread spun too tightly, trembles before snapping. October 31st, 1981 was such a night. Outside, the wind carried whispers through the Godric's Hollow Valley, the same wind that had once carried spells of protection over 1,000 years ago. Inside a small cottage, James and Lily Potter faced the moment that would divide their world forever. They believed the Fidelius charm would keep them safe. They believed their friend would never betray them. But the cloak, that ancient relic of Death's own making, knew differently. Folded neatly on a chair beside James's wand, the cloak shivered as though touched by a memory of foreboding. It had watched civilizations rise and fall, had hidden lovers, rebels, and kings, but never before had it felt sorrow. It could sense the coming of the one who bore the mark of Death's favor, Tom Riddle, the last seeker of the Hallows. When the door burst open and the killing curse split the air, the cloak rippled in silence. The magic it carried, old as time itself, recoiled against what it saw, a man's soul fracturing under the weight of his own ambition. And in that instant, as Lily Potter fell and her child screamed, something impossible happened. The cloak vanished. No hand touched it, no spell claimed it. It moved itself, disappearing into a rift of unseen light, escaping not to flee, but to survive. Because Death, bound by his own bargain, would not let his gift fall into the hands of one who sought to master him. For nearly a decade, the cloak lay dormant, hidden deep within Hogwarts itself, in a place no map could reveal. Some say it rested beneath the castle's foundations, woven into the protective enchantments that guarded the school. Others claim Dumbledore himself found it, and understanding its nature, kept it safe until the time was right. Dumbledore, the last true keeper of forbidden truths. He knew the stories that others dismissed as legend. He had seen the Elder Wand and recognized the signs. He alone understood that the cloak was more than fabric. It was memory. It carried the essence of the one who first defied death, and it was waiting for the child who would do it again. Years later, when Harry Potter received the cloak on a cold Christmas morning, he thought it was a gift from a kind old headmaster, a relic of his father, a keepsake of laughter long lost. But when he first draped it over his shoulders, something awakened. A warmth spread through his hands, not like ordinary magic, but something older, like the heartbeat of the world itself. The castle seemed to hum in response, the stones vibrating faintly as though recognizing an ancient friend. That night, Harry crept through the corridors with his friends, the cloak flowing behind him like living silver. To most, it was a simple act of mischief. To Hogwarts and to the forces that watched from beyond, it was prophecy fulfilled. Because the cloak had chosen again, it shielded him not merely from sight, but from fate itself. Every time he wore it, death could not touch him. When he faced the mirror of Erist, When he hid from Filch, when he stood before the basilisk, the cloak moved like breath, wrapping him not in concealment, but in purpose. It was guiding him, preparing him for the night he would have to walk into the forest and meet death himself, not as an enemy, but as an equal. But Dumbledore, wise as he was, knew the cloak's history came at a price. He knew that gifts from death are never truly given, only loaned, and only until the lesson is learned. He watched Harry grow, watched him use the cloak with innocence, and prayed that when the time came, the boy would understand what even the greatest wizards had forgotten. The cloak was not meant to make one invisible from others. It was meant to make one visible to oneself. And so the pattern repeated, the same as it had for Ignotus, for the founders, and for every hand that ever held it. Those who used it to hide were forgotten. Those who used it to protect became immortal. But far beneath the castle, something else was stirring. Ancient wards shuddered. The enchanted stones whispered in voices older than the language of men. The cloak's reawakening had disturbed something deep, something that remembered the first time Death himself had walked these halls, because Hogwarts, like the cloak, had never truly slept, and now one had awakened the other. Deep beneath Hogwarts, where the air turns cold and the stones remember the echo of spells cast 1,000 years ago, something ancient began to stir. Long before students laughed in the courtyards or portraits whispered along the walls, this land was sacred, a crossroad between realms. And there, buried under layers of enchantment, the shadow of death itself had been sealed away. It was said that when Ignotus Peverell's descendants vanished from record, the cloak returned to where it was first conceived, to the place where life and death intertwined most powerfully, the land that would one day become Hogwarts. The founders, wise and cautious, had felt it, the presence of a living relic beneath their feet. Rowena Ravenclaw, in her journals long hidden from even the wisest of historians, wrote of a veil of night that breathes, that moves though untouched by hand. Salazar Slytherin feared it. He called it the unending dark, a piece of death himself. But Godric Gryffindor, brave to the point of folly, insisted it was not a curse, but a guardian. Thus, deep chambers were built, not to contain the cloak, but to protect it. And there it lay for centuries until the world above once more called its name. Now, as Harry Potter wore it within those same walls, the magic of the cloak resonated with its birthplace. Each time he moved unseen through the corridors, the castle felt his presence, recognized him as kin, a descendant not by blood, but by purpose. Every stone, every portrait, every flickering torch seemed to respond subtly to him. Even the ghosts turned their gaze when he passed, for the cloak carried an energy not felt since the founders themselves walked these halls, but there were others who felt it too. In the darkness below the school, something old and watching began to awaken. The enchantments that had slumbered for centuries, spells crafted by Ravenclaw herself to guard against intrusion, flickered to life once more. It was as though the castle was testing the one who now carried the artifact of death. In the winter of Harry's first year, when he descended beneath the trapdoor to face the trials protecting the Philosopher's Stone, he passed through more than enchanted fire and enchanted chess. He passed through a threshold where the castle itself whispered his name. The cloak pulsed faintly, almost alive, and for the briefest instant, the boy under its fabric saw flickers of shadow not belonging to the room around him. 1,000 faces, blurred and spectral, moving within the folds of the cloak like memories. They were not ghosts nor visions. They were echoes, remnants of those who had worn it before. The cloak was showing him its lineage, for though death cannot be owned, every hand that held his gift left a trace behind. The deeper Harry ventured, the more the cloak seemed to act on its own, flowing faster, bending light and sound in ways beyond any charm. And as he passed through that final door to face Professor Quirrell and the faint presence of Voldemort, the cloak shone with a subtle, silvery glow, unseen by mortal eyes, because Death himself was watching. For the first time since Ignotus, two bearers of the Hallows had come face to face again, one seeking to cheat Death and the other destined to master him by surrender. After that night, Dumbledore retrieved the cloak for safekeeping. He claimed it was to protect Harry, but deep down he understood something far older had begun. The castle's wards had stirred, the cloak had awakened, and Death's attention had turned once more toward Hogwarts. In the months that followed, the headmaster spent countless nights wandering the corridors alone, searching for what he could not name. He visited the old chambers beneath the castle, chambers sealed since the time of the founders, and found the faint shimmer of old magic reawakening. In his private notes found years after his death, Dumbledore wrote a single cryptic line: "The shadow beneath the castle moves once more. The night remembers its maker." The cloak had never been just an heirloom. It was a living key, a bridge between the mortal and the eternal. And now that it had returned to its birthplace, Hogwarts itself began to change. Rooms shifted, stairs led to places unseen. Students spoke of cold winds in locked corridors, whispers in forgotten halls. The air shimmered faintly, as if the veil between worlds had thinned. And those who had the sight claimed to see a pale figure walking the grounds, tall, silent, cloaked in night, as though Death had come back to check on his gift. But this was only the beginning, because beneath the castle's deepest vaults, a chamber sealed since the age of founders began to stir once more, and the cloak, sensing it, would soon lead its bearer straight into the heart of its own creation. Deep beneath Hogwarts, farther than even Salazar Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets, there exists another chamber, one that no map, spell, or ghost dares to reveal. The Chamber of Echoes. It was said to be the Founders' final secret, a place where their collective magic converged, where knowledge, memory, and the essence of their power intertwined with the very foundations of the castle. It was built not for students nor for war, but as a safeguard against the forces that could not be destroyed, only hidden. And it was there, long ago, that the cloak had once been laid to rest. But now, centuries later, as the relic returned to Hogwarts, in the hands of its destined bearer, that chamber began to awaken. Harry never meant to find it. It began with dreams, soft whispers echoing through the dark, calling his name in voices he could almost recognize. They weren't human, nor ghostly. They were older. He'd wake drenched in cold sweat, the faint scent of damp stone and dust lingering in his mind, as though the castle itself was breathing through him. Then came the signs, mirrors fogging in empty rooms, torches flickering when he passed, and always that faint silver shimmer at the edge of his vision. The same glow that clung to the cloak when moonlight touched it. It wasn't until his third year, one cold December night, that the truth began to unfold. Chasing a shadow through the castle's lower corridors, Harry slipped under the cloak, his footsteps silent, his breath shallow. He followed the trail to a section of the dungeons he'd never seen before. The air thick with age, the stones darker, older, carved with runes whose meaning had been lost to time. And there, hidden behind a crumbling archway, he found it, a narrow stair spiraling downward into silence. Each step he took seemed to echo forever, as if the castle itself was listening. The cloak trembled faintly around him, not out of fear, but recognition. It knew this place. At the bottom, he reached a vast circular chamber lit by floating orbs of pale blue fire. The walls were carved with symbols: serpents, ravens, lions, badgers, each one glowing faintly as if alive. In the center stood a stone platform, smooth and cold, its surface carved with a sigil, 3 lines within a circle, the mark of the Deathly Hallows. Harry stepped closer, his fingers brushing the stone. The moment his skin made contact, the chamber responded. The torches flared, the air vibrated, and the cloak, that ancient living fabric, unfurled on its own, lifting like a spirit rising from water. The chamber's light dimmed, and then voices, whispers filled the air, layered, distant, yet clear, hundreds of them, speaking in every tongue of man and magic. They were the voices of the cloak's previous bearers, their memories, their regrets, their warnings. To hide is not to escape. Beware the man who wears all 3. The veil remembers. Death walks the halls again. Harry stood frozen. He wanted to flee, but the cloak tightened around him, almost protectively. It drew him toward the center, and in the blue light, a shadow began to form, tall, faceless, cloaked in something darker than night. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't even a presence he could name. It was Death, but not as an enemy, not yet. It was as though Death had come to look upon what was his, to see if the mortal boy who carried his gift was worthy. Harry raised his wand, but the figure only spoke, a voice like stone grinding against eternity. "Do you understand what you carry, child of light?" The sound was both question and judgment. He could not answer. "The night that hides you is the same that waits for me. Every step you take unseen is one taken closer to me." And then, just as quickly, the figure was gone. The torches dimmed. The cloak fell limp once more, heavy with silence. When Harry finally returned to the surface, dawn was breaking over the castle. He told no one of what he'd seen, not Dumbledore, not Hermione, not even Ron. But something within him had changed. The cloak no longer felt like a gift. It felt like a promise. And Hogwarts, that ancient living fortress, felt different too. The castle's magic hummed faintly whenever he passed, as though aware that the bearer of Death's relic had entered its heart. The Chamber of Echoes had been found once more, and in doing so, a pact older than the school itself had been renewed. What Harry didn't know, what no one knew, was that by awakening that chamber, he had stirred something far more dangerous than Death's shadow, something that had once served Death itself, and was now free again. There are secrets even Hogwarts itself has tried to forget. Deep in the Department of Mysteries, far beneath the Ministry of Magic, lies the Veil, the ancient archway that whispers to the dead. But what few ever learned was that the Veil was never built by the Ministry. It was moved there centuries after its creation. Its origin was Hogwarts. Long before Dumbledore's time, before even Godric and Salazar sealed their alliance, the castle had another guardian, a wizard whose name was deliberately erased from every record. They called him the Keeper of the Veil. He was said to be the first to understand that magic could pierce the boundary between life and death, not through resurrection, but through listening. The Keeper believed death wasn't an end, but a passage, a door through which wisdom might still flow. And so, beneath the foundations of Hogwarts, he built that arch of stone, the first veil. The cloak, the stone, and the wand, the Deathly Hallows, were not yet known as a trio, but they already existed, scattered through legend and fear. The Keeper sought to unite their knowledge, not their power, to understand the language of death itself. It was said he succeeded. Centuries later, Dumbledore would study the traces of this forgotten guardian, searching for answers to his own obsessions. When Harry returned to school, after the events in the Chamber of Echoes, Dumbledore seemed to know more than he should. He watched the boy carefully, his blue eyes colder, sharper, as if measuring the distance between curiosity and destiny. "Tell me, Harry," he once asked quietly, "when you wear the cloak, do you ever hear anything? A whisper, perhaps? A hum?" Harry hesitated. "Sometimes, like a breath. Like someone standing beside me." Dumbledore only nodded, that same distant sadness flickering across his face. "Good," he murmured. "Then it remembers you." He never explained what that meant, but Dumbledore had begun spending more time alone, disappearing into forgotten corners of the castle, descending staircases that shouldn't exist. The portraits didn't see him. The ghosts avoided him. Something had begun to call him, too. And on one such night, the headmaster followed the whispers into the lowest chamber beneath the castle, the same place Harry had once entered. There, at the center of the cold stone floor, he saw it, a faint shimmer, as if the air itself had thinned. The veil's echo. He knew instantly what it was, the Keeper's last creation, a doorway that linked the castle to the true veil, the one now hidden in the Ministry's Department of Mysteries. The arch below the school was dormant, but not dead. Its power pulsed faintly like a sleeping heart, and when Dumbledore approached, the cloak, folded neatly in his hand, began to stir. The air rippled. A whisper formed from the silence, not speech, but memory. Images flickered before him, shadows of old Hogwarts, its foundations newly built, the founders gathered in torchlight, arguing in low, fearful tones. Then another figure stepped forth, cloaked, faceless, his presence heavier than any mortal's. The Keeper. "You seek to protect," the voice said, "but protection requires sacrifice. You seek to teach," it continued, "by law, but knowledge is not wisdom. Tell me, Albus Dumbledore, what price will you pay to keep them safe?" The headmaster said nothing. He only clutched the cloak tighter. The figure extended a hand, pointing to the fabric shimmering with ancient light. "That which hides cannot always be hidden. The boy's path leads through death itself, and so does yours." A shock ran through Dumbledore's body, and then the vision was gone. The veil's echo faded. The chamber was silent once more. When he returned to his office, Fawkes let out a low, sorrowful cry. Dumbledore sat heavily behind his desk and whispered to the Phoenix, "The castle remembers. The old Keeper's work isn't done." From that night on, the headmaster began to alter the castle's enchantments. Subtly, invisibly. Corridors changed, doorways sealed themselves, portraits were silenced. Hogwarts was protecting itself, preparing for something its master feared but could not stop. And all the while the cloak grew stronger, its shimmer deepened, its silence became heavier. The boy who wore it, the man who watched him, and the castle that guarded them both. All were now bound by an ancient thread of death's own making. What none of them realized was that the Keeper's legacy still lingered, not in spirit, but in blood. For somewhere within the living descendants of Hogwarts' earliest students, the Keeper's line continued, and one of them was already within the castle walls. Every legacy leaves a trace, not always in memory or stone, but in the quiet persistence of blood. For centuries, the line of the Keeper of the Veil was thought extinguished, his name erased, his works sealed, his soul swallowed by the echoes of the magic he served. But Hogwarts never forgets. There are certain corridors where portraits fall silent as you walk by, certain staircases that shift not from whim, but from warning, certain ghosts who linger not because they are lost, but because they are guarding. They all remember the Keeper's oath, that one day his descendant would return to bear the weight of the veil once more. And in the autumn of 1996, as shadows lengthened across the castle, that descendant came of age. Her name was Aurelia Vale, a quiet Ravenclaw, reserved, brilliant, and strangely drawn to the forbidden archives of the library. Few knew her story, fewer still understood her blood. She was a half-blood orphan, raised near Godric's Hollow, where strange winds always seemed to whisper through the trees. In her 3rd year, the cloak noticed her. It happened one evening in the Great Hall. Harry had draped the cloak across the back of his chair, and as Aurelia passed, the fabric shimmered faintly, like moonlight recognizing kin. She froze. The air thickened. For a brief second, the cloak rippled as though reaching toward her, alive, aware. She didn't speak to Harry then. She didn't have to. Magic had already made its introduction. Aurelia spent nights studying obscure scrolls that Madame Pince didn't remember owning. Whispers told of a keeper who listened to the dead, of a daughter who vanished beneath the castle during the last days of the founders, of a curse disguised as a gift. Immortality traded for guardianship of the boundary between worlds. The more she read, the clearer it became. Her dreams were not dreams. They were memories. She began seeing flashes, faces she'd never known, chambers she'd never entered, spells spoken in a language older than English itself. In one vision, she stood beside a cloaked figure, her ancestor, as he sealed the first veil deep beneath the school. In another, she watched 4 shadows arguing in torchlight: Godric, Helga, Rowena, Salazar, and then the keeper's voice whispered through time. When death's shadow falls again upon this school, our blood must awaken. Meanwhile, Dumbledore's suspicions deepened. The cloak had grown restless. The enchantments around Hogwarts hummed like a warning. And now this Ravenclaw girl, with eyes that seemed to see too much, had begun to walk the same halls where he once confronted the keeper's echo. He called her to his office one evening. Fawkes perched silently, watching. The headmaster regarded her over his half-moon spectacles. "Aurelia Vale," he began softly, "you've been exploring places most never find." "Why?" She hesitated. "Because they call to me, sir." "They?" "The voices. From beneath the castle. They say, I've been there before." The phoenix let out a low, uneasy note. Dumbledore's gaze hardened, not in anger, but in recognition. "The veil remembers its keeper," he whispered. From that day forward, Dumbledore began teaching her, privately, discreetly, not spells from books, but the old arts. How to read stone memory, how to hear echoes in silence, how to command magic that obeyed emotion more than wand work. It was a kind of education Hogwarts had not offered in 1,000 years, but with each lesson the castle stirred. Doors sealed themselves at her approach. Shadows deepened. Even the ghosts, nearly headless Nick, the Grey Lady, the Bloody Baron, began to avoid her path. For the magic that once protected the school had begun to wake, and it recognized its mistress reborn. Harry noticed it too. One night, returning under the cloak from a meeting with Dumbledore, he saw her by the lake, standing in the mist, staring at her reflection. And for a moment, her reflection didn't move. It stared back, older, wiser, eyes burning with silver light. When she turned, she spoke softly, as though she'd expected him. "The cloak doesn't belong to you alone, Harry." "What do you mean?" he asked, startled. "It never belonged to anyone. It's a bridge between what was and what will be, and it's waking up." Before he could speak again, she walked away, the fog swallowing her completely. That night, Dumbledore dreamed of the old keeper. In his vision, the faceless guardian whispered once more, "The blood has returned. The balance will break. When the cloak chooses both shadow and light, the veil will open." And somewhere deep within the castle's foundations, the stones themselves began to tremble, softly like a heart remembering how to beat. For the first time in 1,000 years, the line of the keeper and the power of the cloak had met again, and the boundary between life and death was beginning to thin. There are secrets in Hogwarts that even the founders feared to name aloud, not because they were dark, but because they were true. And truth, in a place built on magic, can tear reality apart. When Aurelia Vale's blood awakened the old bond with the cloak, the castle itself began to change. Whispers filled the stones, staircases murmuring, portraits turning away when she passed. In the great hall, candles flickered not from wind, but from awareness. Something ancient beneath the floors had begun to stir again, the same intelligence that had once built the veil. And in that awakening, the mirror of Erist began to glow. It started as a faint shimmer in one of the unused chambers near the charms corridor. Filch had locked the door years ago, complaining of reflections that move on their own. But now the mirror's surface rippled like liquid moonlight, showing faces that were not there. Figures in ancient robes, their eyes bright with knowing sorrow. Aurelia found it first. Drawn by whispers only she could hear, she slipped into the forgotten room by night, her lantern trembling in her hand. And when she faced the mirror, she did not see herself. She saw the gate. Behind her reflection stretched an immense archway woven from black stone and blue flame, the veil between life and death. And standing before it, watching her with unblinking eyes, was the shadow of the old keeper, her ancestor. "Why do you call me?" she whispered. His reflection moved, though she stood still. "Because the cloak is stirring," he said. "The gate will open again soon, and this time it will not close easily." "What am I supposed to do?" "Remember what we built, and what we buried." Then the reflection fractured. Aurelia fell backward, her lantern smashing to the floor. For a moment she thought she saw hands pressing against the inside of the mirror. Not ghosts, but living souls trying to return. The next day, she sought Dumbledore. He listened quietly as she described the vision. When she mentioned the black arch and blue flame, he stood abruptly and went to a locked cabinet, one Harry had seen only once before. From it, he drew a parchment older than Hogwarts itself. "This," he said, spreading it open, "was drawn by Rowena Ravenclaw herself. It showed the castle's foundations, the dungeons, the lower chambers, and below them, a ring of runes surrounding a dark pit marked only as the Gate of Return. Ravenclaw's notes were written in ancient runes, but Dumbledore translated slowly. The gate was built to hold what wand and spell could not contain, the tide of lost souls that sought the world of the living. Its keeper bound his life and those of his blood to its silence. But when the descendants forget, the gate remembers." He turned to her, eyes grave. "You have reawakened what was meant to sleep, Miss Vale. The cloak connects to it, as does the stone and the wand. The Deathly Hallows were never separate. They were seals. That night the storm came. Rain hammered the towers. Lightning struck the Black Lake, and beneath it all, the low hum of the castle deepened, a heartbeat made of stone. Aurelia and Harry met in the old classroom where she had first seen the cloak move. She told him everything: the mirror, the gate, her bloodline. "So the cloak," Harry said slowly, "it's not just invisibility." She shook her head. "It's passage, a bridge between realms. It hides you from life because it belongs to death." Then she took his hand and pressed it to the cloak's surface. For a heartbeat, the world vanished. They stood together in darkness, endless, weightless, silent. Stars floated like embers in a void. In the distance, a great door shimmered half open, and through it came whispers, voices familiar and long dead. Lily's laughter, Sirius's cry, even Dumbledore's weary sigh. Harry gasped. "What is this place?" "The space between," she said, "the cloak's true domain." Then something else stirred behind the door, colder, older. A voice that wasn't human whispered, "The Hallows must unite once more." They woke on the stone floor of the classroom, gasping. The cloak was still between them, but now it pulsed faintly, alive. Harry looked at her, terrified. What happens if the gate opens? Aurelia's voice trembled. Then death won't stay where it belongs. Over the next few days, strange things began happening across Hogwarts. Paintings whispered in languages no one had heard. Ghosts flickered in and out of existence, their voices fading mid-sentence. Even Peeves grew frightened, muttering about the cold voices under the floor. In the library, old ink began to rewrite itself. One book, The Age of Founders, changed its title overnight. The new name glowed faintly in silver, The Covenant of the Hallows. Inside were pages describing a pact between four powers: the wand, the stone, the cloak, and the veil. And a warning that if all four awakened together, the dead would walk among the living again. When Dumbledore read those words, he went still. The phoenix on his perch gave a single low cry, the sound of prophecy fulfilled. And somewhere beneath the castle, the old mirror stirred once more, its surface now dark as ink. Not a reflection, but a window. Through it, something watched back. The gate was waking, and Hogwarts was running out of time. The night the gate began to breathe, even the stars over Hogwarts seemed to hold their light. The lake reflected no moon, and the towers, usually alive with flickering torchlight, were shadowed silhouettes against a trembling sky. It was as though the castle itself had paused, listening for something older than time. Aurelia Vale knew the feeling too well now. Every time she neared the cloak, it thrummed faintly, like a heartbeat echoing through fabric. And when she slept, she dreamed of whispers, not from beyond, but beneath. Voices murmuring from the stone roots of Hogwarts, the voices of those who had died within its walls. But that night, the dreams changed. She saw a circle of light, 3 relics lying upon the floor: the Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, and the Cloak of Invisibility. Above them, faint and luminous, hovered the Mirror of Erist. A voice spoke through the light, deep, slow, and sorrowful. The Hallows were never meant for mortals. They were fragments of the same power, the power to unmake the boundary between life and death. The light dimmed, and Aurelia woke to find her window glowing with faint blue flame. Outside, the black lake was rippling, though there was no wind. She knew then. The gate was opening. The next morning, Dumbledore summoned her to his office. He looked older than she had ever seen him, not in body, but in spirit. The map Ravenclaw had drawn now lay open on his desk, the ring of runes pulsing faintly. "Miss Vale," he said quietly, "the Hallows have begun to resonate with one another. The wand has stirred." Ollivander felt it in his sleep. "The stone has moved from its resting place. And you—" He hesitated. "You are wearing the cloak that binds them." "So what happens now?" she asked. He sighed, turning to the window where the light fell cold and gray. "Now Hogwarts remembers everything it was built to forget." That afternoon, Harry joined her in the old classroom, where the cloak had first revealed its secret. He was pale, his scar burning faintly, a pain he hadn't felt since Voldemort's fall. "It's strange," he said quietly. "I feel like something's calling me. The same pull I felt when I faced death before." Aurelia nodded. "Because death remembers you. You've crossed its threshold and returned. The cloak knows it." Then she unwrapped it, slowly, reverently. The air around them shimmered. For an instant, the classroom dissolved, replaced by endless black, and floating in the dark, 3 lights appeared: gold, white, and deep blue. The 3 Hallows. They circled slowly, drawn toward each other like stars collapsing into a single gravity. A whisper rolled through the void, not from one voice, but from many. Together we were meant to guard. Together we became temptation. Together we will awaken. Harry reached out, and the moment his fingers brushed the cloak, a rush of memory filled him. He saw a young man, proud, brilliant, with auburn hair and piercing blue eyes, Albus Dumbledore in his youth, standing before the same three relics. Beside him stood another boy, sharp, golden, smiling like fire, Gellert Grindelwald. They were arguing. Dumbledore's voice shook. "You don't understand what this power will do. The Hallows were never meant to rule. They were meant to seal." Grindelwald laughed softly. "Seal what, Albus?" "Death itself. Imagine a world without it." Then the vision broke into flames. The two friends turned enemies, and between them, something darker than either had summoned. A shadow shaped like a man but hollow within. The first Keeper's curse unleashed. Harry gasped, stumbling back. Aurelia caught him, but her own eyes were wide. She had seen it too. "The Hallows were never gifts," she whispered. "They were locks. And when the Founders sealed the gate, they used those artifacts to hold it closed." Harry stared at her. "Then if all three are active now?" She nodded slowly. "The lock is breaking." Meanwhile, deep below Hogwarts, the corridors began to shift. The dungeons reformed into shapes unseen for centuries. A faint wind blew upward from cracks in the floor, carrying whispers, not in English but in the language of the Founders. Professor McGonagall, walking the lower halls, swore she saw torchlight flicker against walls that no longer existed, and in the shadows, a figure in old robes watched her, tall, silent, wearing a mask of bone. When she blinked, it was gone. By nightfall, the Great Hall was trembling. Students whispered of cold air drifting from beneath the floor. Ghosts refused to appear, and even the paintings hung silent. Only the phoenix in Dumbledore's office still sang, a single sorrowful note that echoed through the castle like a farewell. Down in the Forbidden Forest, the centaurs gathered beneath the stars. Firenze gazed up at a strange new constellation forming, 3 points of light and a dark circle between them. His voice was grim. "The gate opens. The dead stir, and the line between realms grows thin once more." As midnight struck, the air above the lake split with a soundless shiver. Aurelia and Harry, standing on the shore, saw the reflection of the castle twist, and behind it, in the water's surface, appeared the outline of a door. Blue fire burned around its frame. Hands pressed faintly against it, pale and waiting. Harry whispered, "How long before it opens?" Aurelia looked at the cloak, now glowing faintly in her hands. "It already has," she said. "We just haven't seen what's coming through." There are moments in time when the past and present no longer run parallel. They collide. That night at Hogwarts, the two became one. The gate beneath the castle was open. Its heartbeat pulsed through the stones, through the walls, through every breath of fog curling over the black lake. The air shimmered with unseen light, not bright but ancient, like moonlight that had traveled too far to still belong to this world. Aurelia Vale stood at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, the cloak in her hands, its fabric alive with cold fire. Harry Potter stood beside her, the Elder Wand in his grip. Between them, the Resurrection Stone rested on a rock, trembling as though aware of what was to come. The three Hallows had gathered once more. The seal was breaking. Far beneath the castle, the mirror of Erist split in half. Its surface no longer showed dreams, only faces, those who had died within Hogwarts walls. Rowena Ravenclaw, Helena, nearly headless Nick, even Snape. They looked upon the world they'd left behind and wept. From the broken mirror rose a lightless smoke that took the shape of a man, tall, shrouded, faceless, the first keeper, the guardian of the gate. His voice rolled through the castle like thunder through a tomb. You have forgotten the covenant. You have awakened what cannot die. Dumbledore's portrait flickered in the headmaster's office, its painted eyes glimmering. Then it must be sealed again, he whispered. Aurelia and Harry made their way down into the depths, past the dungeons, past the Chamber of Secrets, past even the level of the lake. At last they reached a place no map had ever shown. A vast chamber carved of black stone, lit by blue flame, and at its center stood the arch, the gate of return. It was beautiful and terrible all at once. Through its veil, figures moved, drifting, silent, waiting, every lost soul who had ever died at Hogwarts. Aurelia stepped forward. "You're the keeper." The shadow inclined its head. "I was. Until your blood called me back." She raised the cloak. "I can close it again." The keeper's hollow eyes flared. "Can you?" "The cloak hides life from death, but it cannot deceive me. You are the last of my line. The seal can only close with your life." Harry's hand shot out. "No, there has to be another way." But the keeper's form wavered. The gate began to widen. Hands reached through, spectral, desperate, hungry for warmth. In that moment, Aurelia understood. The Founders had not created the Hallows to defy death. They had made them to contain it. She turned to Harry, tears in her eyes. "If someone must stay, it has to be me." Harry shook his head. "We'll find another way." Aurelia smiled faintly. "You already did. You lived." Then, before he could stop her, she stepped forward. The cloak spread like wings, wrapping her in shimmering light. She looked back one last time, at the boy who had conquered death and still carried its weight. "Tell them the cloak was never about hiding," she whispered. "It was about protecting." And then she walked into the gate. The chamber shook. The blue flames flared white, and the arch sealed itself in a burst of light so pure it seemed to erase sound. The gate closed, quietly, completely. Only the cloak remained, folded neatly on the stone floor, its glow fading to stillness. Harry fell to his knees. Somewhere above, the castle sighed, a deep exhale of release, as if the very walls knew balance had returned. The whispers faded, the ghosts returned. The torches steadied their flames. Hogwarts lived again. Weeks later, on the shores of the Black Lake, Harry stood with the cloak draped over his arm. The wind was calm, the sky clear. He knelt and let the cloak touch the water. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw her reflection, smiling, whole, at peace. Dumbledore's voice, faint but kind, drifted on the wind. Every great power demands remembrance, and every sacrifice, no matter how quiet, keeps the world in balance. Harry folded the cloak and looked toward the castle. Somewhere within, a phoenix sang, and for the first time in many years, its song was not of morning, but of dawn. Thus ended the story of the Invisibility Cloak, not a tool of concealment, but the last seal of protection between the living and the dead. The legend endures not because of the power it held, but because of the life it saved. Thank you and good night.